Welcome, my name is Rich Breton. I've been volunteering for a number of years at the Freight House as part of Heritage Park Railroad Museum. And I was asked to give a talk today on how we bring history to life on the model railroad, some of the details and some of the little things. And I'm also going to talk about the basic construction we went through, because a lot of times when somebody looks at a finished model railroad, they look and say, how can this possibly have been done? You know, and even ourselves, having worked on it over 12, 14 years, sometimes you're surprised when you see older photographs. So I have the older photographs when we started this layout. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown on what this looks like. You're over here, so you obviously know what our overall outside looks like. You can see over here, most recently we had a group of third graders, 45 third graders that came to visit our layout. They broke them up into groups, a little bit of a challenge, but it was part of an educational program. And interestingly, a model railroad, a lot of times people think of it as a toy. In actuality, there's a really practical nature to it. We have a historical museum, so we can actually show what life was like in 1909. So you can see a little bit, you know, we say see history come alive. A lot of model railroaders, some just run trains, but a lot of people try to capture a time frame, and that's what we're doing over here. Some of the points I was making with the children, as well as you can see on the layout, I'm going to cover some of that in the presentation, but there's a lot of things we show people about what transportation, agriculture, industries, home life, and what education was like in that time frame. This is pretty much what the layout looks like itself, and pretty close to what the state is now. This is a little bit wider view. You can see in there that we've added some cameras and things that help show people how the trains are running per schedule and those kind of things. So this is one of the detailed scenes of the layout. This is Sanbornville, and the large Sanbornville station with the Armstrong restaurant on one end. You can get an idea of the details that are there. Here's another view. Here's the roundhouse and the turntable with a locomotive coming out. The trains are an important part of the transportation aspect of that. You can see here's a train running through Union Meadows. It's a causeway that's still there today near where that gas station is. But you can see the train running across that. In the back is the Excelsior Mill, in the back with poplar cars that are being unloaded. Here's another freight train going across as well, and you can see how the trains are blending into the village part itself. Let's see, this is what the Freight House looked like when they first started the construction of it. The renovation of the Freight House itself. And you can see where there's a stairway. Today we have a ramp over there. This is what the inside looked like when they first started working on the Freight House. Kind of interesting. It had the yellow pine floors, and there was no walls at that point. So this is Bill Gaver showing the concept presentation for the layout in 2012. You'll notice he's showing the boxes and the overall layout look like. This Bill with those diagrams are the track plans. I'll talk about that more in a minute. You can see this is the initial benchwork that was installed in December 2012. We're using structural members, so there's very few legs and stuff. You can interestingly see that the layout, the layout itself is very few supports are there. It's all anchored onto the walls. This is a Boston and Maine area that we model from Rochester up to North Wakefield. And this is one of the older time photos that we base most of the work on the layout on. This is a crossing shanty in downtown Sanbornville. A lot of the track diagrams were researched from the actual Boston and Maine archives in Lowell, Massachusetts. And this is one of the typical ones for East Wakefield, or we call Burleyville. This is the diagram we used when we were developing the track plan for the layout itself. You can see that some of the sidings, and there's a lot of details here, like rock walls and culverts and all that kind of stuff that you end up seeing along the way. So we've got those for each of the villages, and we use it when we're developing the track diagrams and the planning. So this is still the planning stage of the layout. These are the 5 villages that we model on the layout, including a staging thing over here. So we have Union, Sanbornville, Wakefield, today called Wakefield Corner. And then Burleyville, or East Wakefield, and then North Wakefield and Matthews. I'm explaining that part right over there.
East Wakefield used to be called Burleyville?
Yeah, well, actually it was called East Wakefield first, and then it started to be called Burleyville. In the early 1900s, the railroads were starting to have accidents. You can imagine, if you know the area here, you can have things like Wakefield, East Wakefield, North Wakefield. The same thing was happening across the railroad in different places. So a telegraph were communicating, and they'd say, you've got clearance to East Wakefield, and somebody might have interpreted it as North Wakefield. So what would end up happening is they could have accidents along the way. So the railroad started renaming a lot of the railroads. An example is North Rochester. Most people don't know what North Rochester is, but they had, East Rochester, Rochester, North Rochester. North Rochester got named Hayes. So today, if you look, when you're going down Route 16, you'll see a little sign that says Hayes. And people know that. It's the same with Burleyville. I find it interesting because we have visitors and they call it Burleyville now. Most of the times people would have called it East Wakefield. But that's why it was named that way. It was for efficiency and preventing accidents. So this is a little bit of what we did with that track plan. Once we had those track plans I was just talking about, we took those and transferred them using track and the turnout. Using the track and the diagram, we put it on craft paper, and this is a chance where we're able to take that and actually put the scenic elements in it, like where the roads should go, the rock walls, the hills, and those type of things. So you can see that in the planning stage over here. And we had the references on top, because even when we were doing this construction, we did have visitors. You can see a couple of the guys. That's Bill Gaver, who's over there working underneath. And Ken White is working up on the top. So when you're doing the track diagrams, a lot of times I'm talking about the construction or how you go about doing that. The most important thing are your turnouts. So you put those in there, and you can see there's markings on the board. The reason we're doing that, we know we're going to put ballast. So the areas where the ballast would be gray are painted gray, and the areas where things are black are painted black in anticipation of that. You can see a couple of guys over here. Dave Sias and Bill and I were instrumental developing the actual track plan originally. You can see that's the corner with the turntable over there, and there's some of that bench work I was showing you. I made this model before we even had a layout. That's Matthews Station. I'll show you a little bit. So you can see over here, 2013 was a very busy year. Had a lot of people working on the layout at that time. And it's kind of funny, even seeing this compared to what you look at today, how much progress was made. But you can see we had at that time, we may have had 7 or 8 people working at the same time. There's some people working on the electrical stuff. I'm not going to talk too much about the electrical. That's from another presentation. But there's a lot of work underneath the layout you never see. Now, that does add to the realism, because when you have all those controls and the trains you see running automatically around the layout, they do that with all that wiring and stuff that's under there. So we had a lot of work in 2013 because we planned our first open house, which was set for December. So Bill was busy. I remember recalling now, Bill was here sometimes 4, 5, 6 days a week trying to do some of this work along the way here. So this is interesting because we wanted to have a little bit of scenery when we had the first open house. So sometimes you find little funny stuff. You know, that's where you take, like we call record photos. If I knew how to reset that really quickly, I could fix it. But Ken White, the guy you saw a little while ago, we had leftover extruded foam, and these mountains were built with foam underneath. He actually had some foam. He said they kind of look like little critters, and you see that one's like a pig and another one a little whale or whatever. So buried in that mountain you see are those little creatures. So. And so this is it, a little bit more finished. This is not the way you see it today, but we had enough of it so we could open and show people what scenery looked like. So this is a little bit more, again, that open house. You can see we had one little stretch that was done, and we temporarily put backdrop. And then there's a train running over here, but I believe that was, the fascia is green, so I think it was after that open house. So here's that open house itself. We had a number of visitors, you know, at different times. But you can see we only had a small portion of the layout done at that time. This is Matthews Station. That's a building I had actually made quite a while ago. And on our open house, we didn't have a lot of the layout done, but we had that particular building. And this is a newer picture of, this one here is a little bit newer. That was done a couple years ago. This is interesting because Elizabeth Banks McCurry wrote The Footsteps of Pride in the Past, that history book that we used when we did the layout. She visited the layout in 2013, and she was 93, and she looked at what we were doing, and she says, "You're bringing history back to life." And as model railroaders, that's really what we're trying to do. We try to have models be accurate enough to do that. In addition to that, in the front of her book, I found this quote, and the people who've lived in Wakefield a long time, I'm sure know Ralph Waldo Hansen. He worked as a city officer for like 46 years or so. And I always like this little quote. He says, "How do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been?" And you kind of look at it, and it sounds a little corny at first, but if you think about it, and you look at it, it's interesting in that by looking at what life was like in the early 1900s, a lot of times we discover stuff that seem to be new today, but the fact that you look at the past and you look at the current, the two can be linked up together. So doing a project like that actually shows you the older things and the newer things, and it makes sense that way. This is a funny kind of picture from that. It was around Christmas time, and we had this guy's a model railroader. He was a close friend of mine, Neil Falby, who passed away, but he was in a singing quartet, and then we had Santa that day and all that. This is 2014. This is some of the crew members we had at the time. You can see a mock-up of this roundhouse. So we had mock-ups at the time where it's been finished since then. This is shows, this is the work that goes behind building that roundhouse. You can see with a turntable, there's a lot of work in that corner that you don't have an appreciation for because all those tracks are there, and we actually cut a track, a portion behind it, for like service pits underneath. If you look inside there, we actually have service pits underneath the locomotive tracks that were carved in between the rails to make it look more realistic. That's the workings of the turntable. I turn that on my wood lathe. You can see the bottom part with the diamond mechanism to actually have the motion. The bridge itself is a brass fabrication. You can see it kind of looks like jewelry. All those pieces are hand cut. They're all soldered together to give you that. The most important thing here is that this is 90 degrees and it's balanced, so when the turntable turns, it stays level and doesn't end up tilting in different directions. So there's a lot of times when you look at the finished thing, you have no idea that's what's inside of it. So this is some of that track work I was just talking about with the crank and things like that. So this is a little, I'm going to go back over here and in this way. So this is the day after we had a hurricane, and we were open that day, and a large group came in. And it's interesting that it was a man, he had actually 3 or 4 generations with him, and he wanted to show the model railroad layout because his family, his great-grandfather had worked for the railroad for 60 years, and his grandfather himself had worked 55 years. And this lady over here, Mary Brackett, she was his great-grandmother. So James Tucker and Mary Brackett had, gotten together, and he came to visit, and he expected just to show a model railroad. And what was interesting is when I started discovering who they were, he had his children and grandchildren, and so all these generations, and he wanted expecting to just show a model railroad of the area. It turns out this is the office of his great-grandfather. He was a maintenance supervisor for the Boston and Maine Railroad. So I showed him the building in my hands. He took a picture with his family. He was like, this is absolutely amazing. So I had him write on the bottom the names of his people, the family, and what years and stuff they were worked for the railroad, and I put that on there. So this is a case where we said bringing history back to life. This is a case where a family was here to actually look at the model railroad and got so much more out of it. Then you guys might have noticed we have that Ossipee locomotive, and near the woodshed on the layout, the ones who've seen that. His great-grandfather learned to be an engineer in that locomotive. So that was another thing that had happened that particular day. So here's the actual building of his supervisors, and this is a picture of his father and grandfather and that. And you can see over here, this is a picture that's also from that history book. So that was very, very exciting for them. It was exciting for me. It made the day worthwhile having come up here to see that. So you can see how close we are when we start looking at the historical photo and the new model, because we make the models from these photos. And I'm going to show you in a second a comparison of old photos and the new model. Just you can see, I got a bunch of those to come up here. So this is the coal shed itself. So the trains are important. You can see some of the cars over here are actually modeled from real locomotive photographs and real cars. Why does it keep doing that? So anyway, these cars were made for us from a man in Dover. He made 10 cars, and they're actually made from production drawings for different manufacturers that made cars for Boston and Maine. So he made 10 of them, 5 for his layout, and he gave us 5 or donated 5 of them for us. So Bill Gaver is the one that made that coal shed. So I remember all the planning that went into that and all of that. So you can see a view with 2 locomotives there and the coal cars inside with the ramp. They tell me this ramp still exists. It's somewhere in that trail behind the fire station. This is a view of some of the scenery in East Wakefield. Those waterways are actually modeled from real photographs. There's a house on the hill over there, and there's a train at the East Wakefield depot. You can see a lot of the details that are on the layout. That's one of my favorite parts of the modeling, the scenery and the detail part. So a lot of those details, those are all hand-painted, trying to match. In fact, as I've worked through this over the years, I'm now matching the colors of the clothing that were more likely to have occurred in 1909. Bright colors wouldn't have existed in this area. You're not likely to see cobalt dresses or bright red dresses or things like that. That was more in cities like New York or fashion things and things like that. I've had visitors that actually study fabric and linen in college, and they were a treat to watch our layout and see what we had that were actually accurate representations of what clothing and stuff like were like at those days. And the little waistlines you see in museums, she mentioned that. She goes, the reason those dresses still exist is that no one actually really wore them. Or if they did, they were a model or some other thing, and they probably wore it once and they never used it again. That's why they survived. The everyday clothing never survived, which would make sense. Okay, so this is some of that planning, and you can see now, as we got into that time frame, we started putting structures and the track work. You can see some of the planning for the roads and stuff in there. So I'm going to go a little bit. There's those two waterways. You can see some of the cutouts we make. And this little closer view of that track. You start seeing some of the construction of the scenery there. But I'm going to take you through, you can see how realistic the water looks. That's Envirotex. We model the bottom of the water, and then you actually put the Envirotex, make sure it doesn't leak on the floor.
That water is plastic?
It's plastic. It's basically epoxy. If you go to a bar or a restaurant, and you see those tables sometimes that have like matchbooks or coins embedded, it looks like you have about 500 layers of varnish. They're typically using Envirotex is what that is. You can see through it. Some people like to tint it, so if you get a murky kind of look. So here's another view of the East Wakefield, a little bit higher. So I'm going to take you through on how that scenery was developed. I'm going to go really quick because I don't want to take the whole thing with that. So you can see a little bit, another view of that. Another view. The house on top of the hill there is actually a paper model. Doesn't look it, but it's paper. And if you look close, not necessarily in this photo, if you look at the real model, the window panes are all glazed with varnish, and the paper is left plain, so it looks like there's real glass in the windows, even though it's just paper. Okay, the East Wakefield scenery. I'm going to go really quick here. This is probably when the computer's going to normally change over, but now it won't do it because I probably, anyways, sorry. So this, you can see over here, that's pretty much, scenery is pretty well along here, but I want to show you what scenery construction looks like when you start just with a plain bench top. You can see that the first thing we ended up doing is putting in the backdrop. Those are actually real photo backdrops. You'll notice it's at an angle because I knew I wanted to put a hill there. By having a hill, I could angle that up and make it look like more of a hill, even though the real photo was taken in a farm pasture. So you can see the bottom didn't matter, but I just painted it green just for, it was like distinguishing where the two different surfaces were. This particular part, when the backdrops were done, there were some spots I couldn't get the photo backdrops to work. So one morning, there's like a 12-inch square here. I hand painted that to kind of blend in the photo backdrop on this side and the photo backdrop that was over here. Normally there's a road here that goes down, I believe it's called High Street, that would go down. So I eliminated the High Street and painted that part into it. So, okay, so here's how we go about doing this. This is a combination of materials. Some of the back, I kind of made a profile board out of expanded foam. And in the front, I like to use the corrugated cardboard strips. You kind of do a basket weave. You take those strips, and they're very flexible. You bend them around. You can use clothespins and hot melt glue, and you put those together. So you can see me doing this basket weave I was just talking about. So what it's doing is it's making a support structure to hold gauze and stuff that you're going to put on it in a little bit. You can see Bill is helping me. You can tell from our smiles that this is fun work. It's not looks tedious or whatever, but it's just fun. We had fun building the layout over the years. Okay, so this is with the basket weave that I was just describing. So it may not look like too much, and you plan ahead. It's like, I call this 3D art, because if you look, there's a little platform there, and that little platform is intended to be for the East Wakefield School down the road a bit. So. Okay, now after that basket weave is there, you put on, they sell plaster gauze. Ironically, it's the same stuff if you break your arm and they make you a cast. Today they use fiberglass, and when I was a youngster, they used to use plaster gauze. They would soak it with water and they'd put that on your cast, and it would set really hard in a hurry. Today you might find one that's more like plastic or fiberglass. But, so that's what you use there. It's really convenient for model railroaders. After that's there, you put in some plaster coating, and those are actually rock castings or plaster that's been carved with rocks. Here's with a little bit of grass in between the rocks. You can see some of those platforms that I had left in there. So planning ahead to have buildings put in there later. So this is kind of an aerial view of that. Now I've added trees. So you can see how we went from a flat surface into a three-dimensional, looks like a backdrop thing. That's kind of what it looks like today. You can see with the buildings in place now, and then the backdrop and the photo backdrop in the back, and then the roads and stuff are all installed. Okay, in 2014, we did a lot of like different kinds of structures that were added. And structures and details take a lot of time to build. So this is where it's handy when we got more people working on stuff. This sawmill was donated to us. You can see a couple guys are working on it. We converted it. The model was made to kind of work off of a boiler, and then we changed it so we wanted to make it run off of like a water section. So you can see there's a weirs, and the dam that you see on the layout is over there. We made that at my house. There's a little closer view of inside the sawmill. So some of the details that take a lot of time, and when you look at them, it doesn't really appear like it takes as much time as it does, but this is what a grade crossing in the time we're modeling would look like. You see these timbers, and those are actually built in place on the layout, one little piece of wood at a time. And you got to make it so that the flanges still go across, and then the ends are beveled, because if any equipment is dragging, it bounces over those timbers and it doesn't get snagged and break your air lines or whatever. So there are a lot of these grade crossings on the layout. The one that's right in Union is probably the one that stands right out. This is the Union grade crossings. Right now we're meeting right about here. So Chapel Street curves around the back, Main Street's 125. This Bridge Street where the blacksmith shop is. So you can see where these grade crossings are all individually fit in place like that. And then the roads and stuff are chalked and that kind of stuff to make them look right. Along with the grade crossings, you got grade crossing signs and what they look like in 1909. So we've actually made our own decals using a Microsoft program for the lettering style. And then I made a little fixture, and these are all made out of brass. And you solder these things and you paint them. And the portion in the ground was black, and that top. So that adds a lot of details when you're looking at it. They were only on one side of the road, and they were about 15 feet tall, so the wagons actually went underneath them. It's interesting because today's grade crossings, they're some way up high. You drive under them, kind of like a bridge. It was a similar thing in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's what it looks like compared to the locomotive. This is the Pioneer Building in Sanbornville. That was built by Dave Sias. That was the only building on the layout that had electricity. This is a building in East Wakefield, a passenger station. It was Bill Gaver built that. This is the East Wakefield Freight House. Dave Sias made that model. I'm figuring we had about 10 or 12 people that made models on the layout. In 2012, Jay Elin joined us. Jay's favorite thing is to build large structures. He doesn't like to build little small ones. He does them, but he likes to build large structures. He built the model of the Union Hotel, the building we're in right now. And he's also, here's this Union Hotel on the bench. And there's the Flatiron House, which used to be the post office, and that's right across the street here. So that's what he also made the Sanbornville station. I'd estimate he got about 2,000 hours in this model. It took over about almost 2 years. What's more interesting is inside he actually has an interior. This end on the right end over here, that was the Armstrong restaurant, and I helped him with a few of the parts inside, but we actually have the pie covers, where they cake cakes and pies and things like that, and so all the interior of that building is actually finished as well.
So if you look at it, you might get hungry.
You might get hungry. Yeah, well, I don't know. One of the key things, they would serve up to 150 people in 30 minutes. So maybe being hungry might help. When you got off that train, I don't think there was a lot of many choices, but you might have a pot pie and a sandwich, or a sandwich. So, okay, so some of these are larger structures. This is interesting over here. Here's the Union Hotel, and this is the passenger station that was in Union in 1909. So Jay made the building, and he gave it to me, and he said, okay, you plant it. So when we say planting a building is we make it into the scenery so it looks like it was there all along. A lot of times you go to a model railroad, they sit up on the top. So having them in the ground helps a lot, and then I also detail that. This little board over here is one of my little favorite stories. I saw this board on 2 different buildings 7 years apart. And I'm like, you think it's just a piece of scrap wood, but it wouldn't be in 2 photos 7 years apart. I figured out that it was important to have it on that model. What that is the board when they unloaded a baggage car. It's the little ramp they hooked onto the door, and they roll the barrels down or slide a box up or down. So it was actually a tool, is what I believe it is. And I'm like, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm like, so sometimes you try to understand what's there. You can see in this photo right here. See that board? The other photo 7 years later, the board was still there, but it was in a different place. So that told me it's not just a piece of scrap wood. Okay, so this part, the next series of these photos are kind of interesting. So what I tried to do, what I mentioned what we're going to talk about in the presentation, is showing the original photos and showing the model. So I got a series of those, and I think this is pretty entertaining. I could have found a real older photo of the Union Hotel, but there was one I was kind of towards the, so that's what it looks like today, and this is what our model looks like. There are lots of photos. Ironically, a lot of the photos actually have big trees in front of them, so you wouldn't have seen much of the actual, older photo of the building. But they're out there. This is the blacksmith shop. I don't have one from 1800s or 1900s, but that was the actual building, and I made the model of that from there. You can see the matching of the windows, the doors in the front, and it's above the river. It's one of my favorite. I did this building recently. You can see the inside. That's the inside of the real blacksmith shop. See the forge with the legs? And inside I have the forge with the legs and all of the tools that are in there. I did backdate it a little bit because they have an electric blower for the forge. And I put the hand crank version because it was way back. They actually have a big bellows. It's still in the back of the shop, where they would have a big bellows that they would work to get the air to increase the temperature of the fire. This is the Sanbornville station. It's pretty neat. That was the same station I showed you a little while ago. Here's a photo from a postcard. A lot of times we get these postcards that people donate them to us. And sometimes just as interesting as you look at the postcard, because they were personal communications, they write little notes like, Merry Christmas, and I hope you're okay, or, we're doing fine, and stuff like that. So sometimes you'll see little notes and stuff like that on the postcards, but they're really valuable for us when we make the models. So this is Wakefield Corner. So this photo over here is really neat. We've just used that recently to make a model of that mail crane. And you can see over here, there's little details, like that's the outhouse. And the same thing on the model there behind that lattice work. This is the Garvin building. Today is known as Lino's, where Lino's restaurant is there. You see the model of the Garvin building, and then there's right here the model of the Garvin building, and there's the original. You can also see we're putting carriages and other stuff, just like it was in the other one. So the details, if you look at one of these historical photos, a lot of them were very high quality, because they'd use these glass plate images with very large box cameras, and the exposure was taken over a long time. Sometimes you'll actually see somebody walking across or something. So, but if you look at the details, it helps you when you're making a detailed scene. Things like that story about the board. Here's the town hall. There's a picture from across the tracks, and there's the model of the town hall. This painting of High Street, I had a postcard of it, but it was in the summer, and I wanted a little bit of color for the fall foliage, so that's actually painted on the wall between the 2 buildings. It's kind of funny, somebody visited a couple weeks ago, and they go, look, Dad, that's our house. It's actually just painted on the wall, but they live in that house. Right next to it, a library and stuff is. So it was pretty interesting that, a youngster noticed that their house was in that painting. So Here's a Matthews station in North Wakefield. I did something a little different intentionally here. So here's the old photograph. Here's the model, okay? If I took all of those photos, to me this looks more realistic because it's the same models we see in color, but the photography in 1909 was all black and white or sepia. So if we took photos of our layout and did them in black and white or sepia, people actually believe it's the same photos that was taken over 120 years ago. So, yeah, this had lattice around the outhouse. It was so poorly made, I could tell it wasn't going to hold up, so I made it without the lattice. I'm like, I don't know how the real one survived, so I wasn't about to make a model of something that was super fragile. East Wakefield, Burleyville, that was a very busy station. You can see the amount of people and stuff that were there. Extremely busy station. So we tried to put more people and stuff like that on it to kind of match the photo again. This is the freight house in East Wakefield. The prototype photo and then the model. You can recognize a lot of little things that are there, the window placements and the doors. And this is Main Street, Sanbornville. People that know the area. So that's the passenger station. If you go up Main Street, that's Dr. Badman's office, that house. You can see it over here. That's a model of it. This is a case where it was made 84% to give the forced perspective of what it looks like. It's interesting to look at some of the people that are over here. Things like that, that wagon. At first I didn't think a water wagon may belong in this area, but an older man visited one day and he goes, oh, he was an army guy, so he was a little bit of colorful language. He says, oh, you got one of those shit washers. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah. He says, when horses were in the streets, they would use water wagons and wet down the roads. So a week later, he showed up and he actually had a postcard of this very same wagon in downtown Central Avenue in Dover. The same exact car, it's made by Studebaker. So they were using it to wash the streets in downtown Dover. The Crossman Watchman shanty. Bill made this model quite a while ago. You'll see this man over here. He had a lot of time. He had garden and all that, but you'll see the model of the man with the beard. So even the figure was made to match the photograph. There's the roundhouse and the turntable. That changed quite a bit year to year. That's a very old photograph of it. You'll notice it has wooden supports. Those were at one point removed. A different turntable, I think, was put in there. Oh. Workers, tools, and locomotives. I love these kind of photos because if you look at them, you see the individual people, what they're wearing, their hats, their tools, what things are around, the locomotives and all that. So we try to duplicate some of that. That gives you a chance to get the designs of them to match. You can see little tools and things that are over here. Okay, so how do we do the details? A lot of people visit and they ask, how can you work on such small things? So someone asked me that earlier today. So the trick is you don't let it go. You know what I mean? If you cut some small thing and it's going to go flying across your house, you'll lose it in the carpets and it'll go flying. A lot of times if you leave yourself a handle, so if you're making a metal part, leave yourself enough work and you make the detail part, and then when you're all done the part, then you cut it off and it's easier to handle that way. So it's the same with these are Jordan wagons. They're really, really clever. This would be, some people call a doctor's wagon, but it would be what a rental car would have looked like in 1909. It was a livery, a little buggy with a very small horse. A visitor told me those are warm-blooded horses. You don't leave them out at night. You got to bring them in, put a blanket on them, keep them in a barn. The work horses at the sawmill, those you can leave outside. They're cold-blooded. So you learn a lot from the visitors as well. So these are lumber wagons for East Wakefield. So I made those out of brass. You can see there's a full one being loaded into a boxcar, and there's an empty one going back for more. The figures were pretty limited when we first started this layout. So what I had done, what you're seeing here, is these were like a company Hawk that made figures in 1955. So that's what it painted, what it would look like in 1955. The one on the on your left is with no paint at all. This is modifications I made to try to backdate it a little bit to look like 1909. Today we can buy some. These are pewter figures from the Staden in the UK. And today it's even more possible now because people are 3D printing these. I just recently bought a set from Timu that are all the 22 figures that were on the Titanic, which was 1912, and they're excellent figures. I started painting those. They're going to be beautiful on the layout when we start putting those in place. Here's kind of, remember I said about not letting go of things? I put them on little roofing nails. That gives you a little handle. It's a trick cake decorators use all the time. If you make a rose or something, you put it on a little pin, you spin it, and you can get all the sides. It's the same with this. You can take these off, paint them individually, and then you can put them back. And typically, because we have so many, I like to paint a bunch at once. That way you kind of like an assembly line. You paint everything that should be white, everything that's flesh colored, blue. And after a while you get the whole figure is all painted. So that's kind of what they look like when they're finished. Here's some that are finished painted. Those came as regular pewter. And these are little children. They're really, really small. They're almost like N scale, but they're HO scale figures. So what do we do with these figures? Then we can start doing little scenes, and that's really my favorite part. You can see it's laundry day. The family gets involved. There's no electricity. There's no running water, so you pump your own water and do your laundry with the washboards, and you put them out over there. Meanwhile, the chickens are busy in the farmyard. You got your facilities in the back, and the train is going by. So it kind of depicts what one day in the life of these people would have been like. Here's a similar thing with the woodshed. The coal shed. And then if you look a little closer, you can see here's one of those little detail scenes. So they brought their rowboat. You got a picnic, and all this food and all of that. It's all handmade. You even got a couple little squirrels over there. It's a funny little story. We get our information from all over the place. When I was doing the telegraph poles, I kind of set them like 9 inches apart. It was about my hand, so I'd go like this way. Well, I learned in a model railroad article, it said, if you're ever going to model a farm, this Our Vanishing Landscape by Eric Sloan is a fantastic book. So I looked through that book, and something hit me, and I've been an engineer my whole life, when I retired now, but have we ever wondered why a mile has got a strange number like 5,280 feet? Okay? It's like, man, that's kind of bizarre. Why didn't they make it 5,500 or 5,000 or whatever? Well, it turns out it's related to what they call the Gunter chain. The Gunter chain was 100 links, and it measured 66 feet. Now, 66 feet is 4 rods, and if you take 80 chains, that equals 1 mile. So that's how you end up with this strange number. Our acres are also related to these chains. You can see 10 square chains is 1 acre. Now what becomes really interesting is the 66 feet, or 1 chain, was used by the cities for their right-of-way. It was used by the railroads for their right-of-way. And coincidentally, 66 feet, or a Gunter chain, is what they usually use to space out telegraph poles. Now, I had an old timer I used to work for. He told me, he says, sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be smart. Because we designed something new and wasn't sure if it was going to work. And he said, sometimes, remember, better to be lucky than smart. So I set 9 inches. I thought it looked about right. Well, interestingly, if you look at my 9 inches, it comes out to 67 feet. So somehow I only managed to be off by 1 HO foot, which is not very much. So this 66 feet, the real use of the Gunter chain was used in Vermont for what they call wall watchers. It turns out one of our volunteers, Paul Zayak, he used to do that in Vermont. You take a Gunter chain and you figure out how many winter chain's worth of stone walls a farm has. And if you had too many of it, you had to take it apart. There was some regulations that you could only have so much fencing on your farm. So he said he actually did that. Visitors 3 weeks ago came over, and they go, I got a model of this. I think I got it right here. Yeah, right here. I got this winter chain. So the fence viewers, the grants, telegraph poles, canal widths, city blocks were all based on this. So the couple visitors, I was showing this little model, and he goes, we were just at the New Hampshire Farm Museum. He says, they have a winter chain over there. We were wondering what they use this thing for. So it's kind of interesting, the stuff that, we learn and we share. So here's another thing in the book. I thought that was kind of neat. New England people were kind of frugal. So sometimes they'd use their old horseshoes and they'd forge them, make them sticky, pointy on the ends, and they'd stick them in a fence post, and that allowed them to put another post across, and it made a very simple gate. So I said, well, that's pretty neat. I said, I wonder if I can make one of those in HO scale. And so there it is. And this is what it looks like installed. So that gate is down over in this area. So.
Were these animals and human figures handmade, or did you find them?
The animals, those, well, a couple things. Most of them you buy, but I found out that some of the animals you buy, especially the plastic ones, aren't made correct. So a lot of times I'll cut out a piece, like the necks are too long or the proportions aren't right. So you kind of cut out a section in the neck, re-cement them back together, reposition the legs and the heads and with all that. So that's, yep. So I think that horse was modified. There's quite a few in the layout that are modified. Now, if something big happened to us, it took almost 3 years. I submitted enough information and stuff like that, because it's very hard to get qualified to have a photographer come up here and photograph your layout. So Lou Sassy and his wife came up here, took about 2.5, 3 year wait time. They came up here, photographed the layout for 3 days, and we were published in the September 2025 Model Railroader magazine. So you can see the models I was just showing you. I wrote the article and Lou Sassy took all of the photographs. When that article came out, we had visitors now that were model railroaders that came from all over. Just this past summer, we had a couple that drove up here intentionally from Ohio to come see this layout because of the model railroader article. Last year, we had a couple that came from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the same reason. They would not have come to New Hampshire except for to come see our layout because of the article. So we've got it framed up here on the wall in the freight house. And then in recent addition, we've put cameras in there. So that kind of shows what the trains are looking like and running as we see them as well. And then we have a lot of fun. We got visitors that come in. This is a while back. You can see Ken's enjoying himself, explaining what's going on over here in the layout. Here's some more recent visitors. This was after Model Railroader. So you can see now, I think we've been getting a lot more visitors that are model railroaders and things like that coming in. The questions are, it's a different, we have a lot of visitors. Some are here for the history. Some here live close to here. They want to see what things look like at the time. Some like to see trains run. And some people are here to understand and learn more about model railroading. So those visitors here are tended to be more, understanding what we did, how we did certain things and stuff like that. So this is my closing moose. This is the scene we have with a moose. It's kind of that marshy area off Route 16. You take the highway, you go towards Rochester. If you look out, there's a marshy area. That's what that's representing. So that's it.
Here, I was hoping to see a moose. That's the only moose I've seen.
That's the only moose you've seen? Oh my. We had one in downtown Rochester a few years ago. He actually walked across the footbridge. That footbridge that goes from Spalding High School to North Main Street area. So he was walking across the footbridge. But anyways, they're over there. You have to go to Kankamankis Highway. That's where you're going to see the moose. Around 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Just watch out for a lot of times tourists go over there. You know, they set up their cameras in the middle of the path of the moose, and some locals will say, "You really want to put your camera there? That moose went in that swampy area. That moose is going to come out of that swampy area." So that's it. If you got any questions, that's what I've got. So, all right. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. So, and thanks. Thank you.
That article must be impressive in Railroader magazine, huh?
Oh yeah, that's what. It's exciting. Yep.
That was fascinating.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Good,
So
let me.
let you do it.
Yeah, because you don't want, or you'll find tape everywhere.
Okay.
Later. You just pull
Hold
that.
this part.
Hold on.
The church what? The turkey base. Oh yeah, on top of the blue building.
All right,
Yep.
hold on. And let me just pull the cable out.
In my house, nothing goes to waste.
Okay.
Doris had visitors and they saw what I was doing about railroading. The one lady kept bringing me once a month, she brought me a
Alright.
shoebox of junk from her house. She said, "Can you use any of this? If you can't use it, just throw it away."